And now I have the pleasure to leave the floor to the Governor of the Bank of Italy, Vincenzo Visco.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Let me first thank the Centesimus Annus Foundation, Pro Pontifice Foundation, for organizing this meeting, and its president, my former colleague Anna Maria Tarantola, for her kind invitation. Over the past 30 years, the world has undergone a radical transformation driven by two phenomena. The first is technological progress, with the innovations developed in the information and communication sector in the 1990s, and more recently, with the so-called digital revolution, the revolution that we are discussing here today. The second is that this process has taken place in the context of a progressive globalization, a globalization which basically is the result of the liberalization of international trade in goods, services, and financial capital, which is being accompanied by strong growth in the cross-country movements of information, ideas, and people. I'd like also to remind that we also have a third element of change, which is dramatic, the demographic change. In the last 30 years, the world population has increased by 50%. And the increase is for more than 90% in what we used to call the third world, emerging economies, less developed economies, and so on. And this has implications for not only the well-being of us, but for the well-being of that part of the world itself, which is basically the dominant part. And with that, we have observed a substantial reduction in absolute poverty. So we cannot really claim that globalization has been all for the bad. As a matter of fact, it has helped billions of people to get out from poverty. But it has to be governed, and this is what is lacking. These phenomena are having widespread, profound effects right down to our everyday life. The introduction of the internet in the early 90s has permanently changed interpersonal communications and is now shaping how consumption and production take place. As a result, the digital economy is among the fastest growing sectors. In the European Union, it produces about 7% of total value added and participates, obviously, for the production of the rest. The integration of markets and international fragmentation of production have given rise to the so-called global value chains. And this has allowed costs to be cut, making the products accessible to a wider range of consumers. These transformations, therefore, promise great welfare opportunities, but they also pose major challenges at both the economic and the social level. New technologies have already started to replace many manual and especially routine jobs, cutting costs while possibly creating temporary strains on employment. Data processing and information-intensive tasks, in which human contributions once appeared to be indispensable, are also increasingly being automated. Recent examples include the introduction of customized online language courses based on machine learning techniques, the internet bots hired by a growing number of firms to handle the initial stages of customer services, the new possibilities opened up by the latest generation of virtual personal assistants. Basically, all these replaces what all of us used to do. The combination of globalization and technological progress has also provided all companies, not just multinationals, with a new potential pool of human capital from around the globe. These may have contributed to generating additional tensions in advanced economies in our part of the world, which have seen a significant portion of their key industries relocate to other geographical regions. The burden of these changes is borne unevenly across countries and social groups. In advanced economies, it has generated fears of a revival of the phenomenon that 90 years ago John Maynard Keynes called technological unemployment. The experience of countries such as the United States, Japan, Germany, which are today at the frontier of technological developments, and where unemployment rates are close to historical minimum levels, suggests that, as Keynes himself concluded in 1930, technological unemployment may well only be a temporary adjustment phase. Policymakers, however, cannot ignore the costs of this transition. This may be a long-lasting transition, and every effort should be made to minimize the difficulties for those who are affected the most. Longer-lasting implications may emerge for labor market participation, the quality of occupations, and wage inequality. Over the last few years, in fact, the structure of job opportunities has sharply polarized in many advanced countries, with expanding demand in both high wage and low wage expectations. It is not only rich versus poor. It is much more subtle and complex than that. Diminishing opportunities in the middle wage jobs, the pool where most jobs used to be contained. More specifically, employment has increased in many managerial, highly professional, technical roles on one hand, and on the other hand, in occupations such as low education, food service jobs, home aids, security services. Job opportunities have instead fallen in white-collar administrative and sales occupations and in middle-scale blue-collar production, craft and repairs. This decline is detrimental to the earnings and the participation rates of the middle class, affecting in particular workers without a tertiary education. New technologies are also having a multifaceted impact on labor intensity, measured by the average number of hours worked per worker. We have to bear in mind that in advanced countries, an important secular trend has been the decline in the average hours worked per worker, which moved in tandem with increases in productivity and wages. In recent decades, however, these trends seem to have changed. Labor intensity in particular has shown a bifurcation. On one hand, a substantial portion of global labor force now works very long hours, more than 48 hours per week. On the other hand, there has been a growth of often involuntary short-hour and part-time contracts, with the most famous example probably being the so-called mini-jobs in Germany. Although more research is needed to fully understand the causes of both phenomena, technology seems to have contributed to amplifying them. For those who work more, for example, business smartphones and other digital devices may have blurred the boundaries between work and private life, further increasing the number of hours worked. On the other hand, the so-called gig economy jobs, micro-tasks, crowd working, manual services, have fueled time-related underemployment, a form of labor underutilization, affecting those who would be willing to increase their working hours, but are unable to do so. Which policies should be designed and implemented to contain the economic and social cost due to higher automation and digitalization? My view is that the most important response should be to prioritize investment in education. Investment that must be inclusive because, as recently argued by Pope Francis, every change calls for an education process that involves everyone. In Italy, for example, The challenge of raising human capital is especially important. Data show that compared to other advanced countries, Italians spend less time in education. They learn less, and once they are in the workplace, participate in less professional training. As the labor market participation is also low, that brings to the share of young people who are referred as net, not in education, employment or training, to well above the European average. But public investment in education does not mean simply providing more, throwing more financial resources to schools and universities. They are needed, of course. But what is extremely important is quality spending. Quality spending is needed to improve the infrastructures, because we need schools that are not only endowed with up-to-date ICT tools, but are also sufficiently attractive and comfortable. Students should be able to enjoy and fully benefit from their time in attending them. In addition, a far-reaching reflection is needed on both what is taught in schools and how it is taught. You will recognize that I'm talking about schools and not universities, but I'm deeply convinced that you really have to start from schools. And then, obviously, research, university teaching is fundamental, but I'm afraid that we simply spend too little in the education of our children. With regard to the content of education, many observers place a greater emphasis on creative subjects. It is now widely recognized that a modern school curriculum should integrate science, technology, engineering, mathematics, known with the traditional acronym STEM, with the arts. It has been recognized, STEAM, as well as reading and writing. So we're going backwards, recuperating what had been lost, STREAM. In fact, when most routine and data-driven tasks are automated, human contributions will be concentrated in those creative tasks aimed at developing new goods and services or at customizing or differentiating existing ones. Importance should also be given to financial education, including its digital facets. New technologies in the financial industry are introducing novel products, new services, providers, but the growing digitalization of financial decisions is not always accompanied by an increase in financial literacy levels, even among the younger population. For Italy, we have been conducting a number of surveys, as the OECD has done in the last few years, and one of these surveys is extremely clear. It has been conducted within the group of 20 using a methodology developed by the OECD and shows a very low level of financial literacy with respect to the G20 average, especially among the least educated respondents, the elderly and the women. Only about 30% of all the respondents showed barely sufficient financial knowledge, versus a still low 48% on average for the G20. The G20 includes, of course, South Africa, Indonesia, countries which one would, Mexico, countries which Brazil, Argentina. So it is not limited to the very advanced countries. So we are much below the average of these large group of countries. Enhancing financial education, as well as familiarity with digital tools, is needed to raise awareness in the use of digital financial services and help protect customers from digital crimes, such as phishing schemes, account hacking, and data theft. It is also worth remembering that new technologies are leading to a growing digital footprint of consumers and entrepreneurs. Not only financial service providers, but also online retailers, social network platforms, and other internet service providers gather vast amount of personal information. These data are often used as input for algorithms that profile customers and can draw behavioral predictions. Profiling permits the personalization of services, might have somehow positive effects, but it can also lead to unfair discrimination. In the United States, for example, some cases have emerged of discrimination based on ethnicity and gender. In the broader context of data protection legislation, the European Union has built safeguards against algorithmic bias, which include the right to refuse to be, and I quote, subject to a decision based solely on automated processing, including profiling. In the financial sector, this norm applies to decisions on credit and insurance. Financial education would further help to make people aware of the implication of their digital activity, of the use made of their data, and of their rights. An appropriate education would also contribute to limiting the digital divide, that is, the lack of opportunities available to people without access to the internet. As the diffusion of digital devices is becoming more global and their complexity grows, access to opportunities will depend not simply on having the information and communication tools, but also on having the skills needed to use them. Expanding the content of education alone is, however, not sufficient. As Tullio De Mauro, a great Italian professor of linguistics, former Minister of Education, pointed out some years ago, in many countries, school life has been governed by three principles. First, silent listening in class to the lesson of the teacher who explains, between the chair and the blackboard, what is already written in the book. Second, studying the book at home with exercises. Third, back to class with questions to verify the studying of the book. This traditional method, where knowledge is passively imparted from teachers to students, is no longer enough. History, arts, literature, languages, mathematics, science, economics will have to be taught in a dynamic context with sufficient room to stimulate creativity, intellectual curiosity, discussion, and negotiation with other students, the ability to cooperate, enhance respect for others, and foster ethical behavior. Digitalization should not become a prison. It is necessary to learn about it, but we also have to be able to debate its merits and be prepared for the tools that will be used in the future. As Malala Yousafzai, the Pakistani activist for the right to education and the youngest ever Nobel Prize laureate, reminded us in 2013, one child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. In the quest for a better world today, we could also add new digital devices, provided they are used properly, to this list. Improving the content of education and the teaching methodologies is needed to prepare our students, not only for what we think is going to matter in the workplace tomorrow, but also for what we do not yet know. We know that today's workers are required to develop and continuously refine a large arsenal of both cognitive and non-cognitive skills. They need to be able to search for specific information in the ever-growing ocean that is the internet, recognize the quality of this information, process it critically. To adapt to the modern model of business organization, it is widely recognized that there is a great need to develop soft skills, such as problem-solving attitudes, teamwork, effective communication, and negotiation with others. However, adequate investment in education is also needed to face the uncertainty that surrounds the jobs and the skills which will matter in the future. We have to be humble. We do not know enough. But one thing we know, that we have to be prepared to what we do not know. That is, we need a particular kind of education, one that is really missing today. Basically, the current pace of technological change requires workers to learn and to continuously update their skills. Understanding the importance of investing in culture and knowledge, not only throughout our school careers, but also spanning our entire working life, and I would add beyond also our working life, that is, by now we can live for a long period, and we have to live well in this whole period and negotiate with others. This means that we have to be educated to do so. Think about all the old people today that have to go to the ATM and they don't know how to use it, or have to send somehow across the wire money to pay for their basic expenses, and they have to learn how to use the internet. So it is a continuous process. The challenge is even more important in Europe due to its demographic trends. Basically, we know that in the next 25 years or so, the European population will fall for those who currently are in working age, 20 to 65, by about 30 million people. This compares to the billions that will be somehow ready to work and go around coming from the rest of the world. We discuss very much about migration, immigration. I mean, we discuss about thousands, about hundreds of thousands. We have to discuss about millions, hundreds of millions, billions. These are the changes, and we do not do enough to discuss these challenges. A key contribution to somehow improve our ability to provide goods and services, many times goods and services that are not yet basic, but are going to become basic. Goods and services must come from human capital. As pointed out by a famous economist, Edmund Phelps, who is a Nobel laureate in economics about 15 years ago, and who has analyzed the causes and the slowdown in productivity, which has been observed in advanced economies in recent decades, not only in Italy or in Europe. Reviving the dynamism of our economies requires, according to him, rediscovering behavioral attitudes that supported economic growth in the past. And they are the desire to create new things, the propensity to explore, the drive to seek better jobs, to face new challenges and be successful. Education is the key to reactivating these attitudes. Obviously, I totally understand that education is just a word, and vocation might be a nice and important issue to reflect upon, as has been observed a few hours ago. But I still think that not all have that vocation, but they have to be educated to find one. And this is educated on how to live in this world that changes so quickly and so dramatically. And economics is not enough for that. In fact, I would conclude that as an economist and as a central banker, in this discussion I have focused on the role of education and human capital to enhance economic development and especially to respond to the changes that are taking place in the financial system, and we need financial education, and in the global economy. But it would clearly be an understatement to think that investing in education matters only for its positive impact on economic growth or on personal finances. As Pope Francis put it in September 2018, without the right to education, there is no real freedom, which allows every person to be the protagonist of their own destiny. A better education is the key to a better world. It can contribute in a profound way to supporting our sense of civic duty, including increasing respect for others, strengthening compliance with the rule of law, improving trust and cooperation, enhancing solidarity. Well, I'm repeating things that I've said 10 years ago and so on. And every time I meet a new prime minister and so on, we talk about how important it is really to go in depth in these issues. Unfortunately, there is some short-sightedness on the part of the political system, and we have to work hardly to try to foster the importance of investing in changes that probably will provide fruits and benefits after the life of most politicians, but they will be rewarded sometime, somewhere. And so I would like to conclude basically reminding that it is essential to foster values that have an intrinsic worth, regardless of their effects on the economy, and which are key for the social cohesion and the well-being of citizens, values that today are most needed. Thank you very much.